Hello, in this video I'll show you how to make a light display shadow box based on wedding photos. I'm using actual wedding photos to create this light display shadow box, so I start by downloading these photos to my laptop. If you're also using real photos, try to download these in the highest quality possible because this will help when you're editing. If they're lower quality photos, you could see the photos be a little more pixelated. I open these downloaded photos in my Pixelmator editor. I like to use Pixelmator because it's not as expensive as some other softwares, and it has all the tools that I need to do for minor photo editing. I don't do a lot of photo editing, so I don't need a major tool. Any tool you have could work as long as it has a delete and a paintbrush function. I use the large selection tool, which looks like the purple highlighter, to select background to delete. This tool is really useful because it can see edges where you have different colors in the photo, and it can pick up on those edges, which helps you not have to erase specifically along a line. I also use the large eraser tool if I have a really large area that I know I'm going to delete without needing to use the selection tool. If I'm using the selection tool, I can press Command Shift to add to my selected area and Command Alt to delete from the selected area. And it works to go in this way and gradually add or remove areas from your selection, because if you try to select everything at the same time, you might select too much and find yourself having to start over. You can make your selection tool or the eraser bigger or smaller by using the left and right brackets on the keyboard. I'm going to use Pixelmator to edit many of the wedding photos. I'm using one photo to pull the background, which will be the very back layer of the light display shadow box, and it will be the trees and the flooring. The layer in front of that is pictured here, which will be the arch with the see-through baskets and flowers. The layer in front of that, I'll use a photo that has the bride and groom kissing. And then I'll use photos of the bride's dress to pull the lace off of the dress and use that to create the border to go around the very front piece of paper in the light display shadow box. As I'm editing this photo, I'm also trying to keep in mind the limitations of the Cricut cutting machine. I know some small areas will be too small for the Cricut to cut and will just tear the paper instead of looking like a nice clean line. So when I'm working on those areas, I will use my paintbrush to connect and thicken areas to make sure that it's large enough for the Cricut to cut. This could be trial and error, and you might have to cut some things multiple times to get it to the size or the thickness that you like. Once I have all the editing done to this photo, I'll export this as a PNG file. The PNG will save the image as one continuous layer, so when I load this to the Cricut Design Space, it will load as one layer regardless of if I have overlaid images or shapes added. Check out the video linked below to see another example on how to use real photos to create a light display shadow box. In the video below, I spend a little more time working in the Pixelmator space, but today I'm going to spend a little more time working in the Cricut Design Space. Once I have all of my lightbox elements loaded into the Cricut Design Space, then I will start building my different layers. I start with the back layers first so that I can make sure as I'm working my way to the front of the shadow box that everything looks nice as a whole. Looking at the trees in the background, I know I want a lot of light to shine through so that you can see the shadow on the images in front of them. So I think I need the trees to be longer and have the leaves higher up to the top. To do this, I unlock the editing function to make the trees longer without making them wider. Then I also think that I need to split these to be farther apart from the left to the right so that they leave a wider gap in the center of the box. To do this, I'm going to use the slicing tool. So I insert a new rectangle over half of the image, and I highlight the rectangle and then highlight the image and click slice. Then I can delete the parts I don't want and then reformat the trees over the box. Just as a reminder, I'm using this template with 4 different pre-made layers of paper. Check out the video linked below to see how to make your own templates for a light display shadow box. The very back layer should be the template piece that has the thickest border. Each sequential layer towards the front should have 1 step thinner of a border. I'm adjusting the trees within the template piece until I have it to the size and spacing that I like. Once I have this, I'll insert a rectangle to close the gap and I will attach all the pieces together. But I'm not going to weld them yet because once I weld them, I won't be able to edit them individually. And I want to have that flexibility at least until I have the next layer in front of it completed. Then I'll come back and weld these together. To attach the pieces, I click one piece and press down the command button, and then click the additional two pieces, and then click the attach button on the bottom right. My second layer from the back will be the arch with the short flowers and the see-through baskets. I drag these elements over to my next layer and then zoom in to see them more closely. I want the see-through baskets to be very similar to each other, so I actually copy the first basket, paste it, and then flip it horizontally so that it's the same image just reflected over the horizontal line. And I adjust the sizing of all of the components and the spacing of the components relative to each other until I find a position that I like. Once I have the small flowers and the see-through baskets positioned well, I weld these together. I'm doing this instead of attach so that when these actually cut out on the Cricut, they won't cut as two separate pieces, but will cut as one cohesive line. To use the weld function, I click on the first element, then I press and hold the command key and click on the second element. Then with both items highlighted, I click on the weld function on the bottom right of the screen. Next, the elements all have to be connected together to one common item so that they'll stick together when they're cut out. To do this, I insert an oval shape and create a flooring. Then I use the Arrange tool at the top middle of the screen to bring the different elements either forward or backward in space so that I can see them where needed. Then I highlight all the elements in this layer and attach them. I'm using attach here instead of weld so that I can later detach and adjust these as needed. I move this over to the first layer that I'd already edited just to see how all my elements are lining up to the layer behind it. I'm checking that I have gaps and not a lot of overlapping to make sure that light will shine through and create shadows. Then I will detach the features if I need to adjust anything. I liked how this layer looked, so I'm going to go on to my next layer, which is the image with the bride and groom kissing. Similar to the layer before, I'm adding in the oval shape to make sure that the bride and groom will be connected to the edges of the template piece. I'm also changing their size to be a more realistic size to fit with the background. Rather than creating a new oval shape and trying to get it to exactly match the oval from the layer before, I actually used the scroll bar on the right-hand side of the screen to select the oval that had been previously made. Once I had that selected, I copied and pasted it as a new oval. Then I use the attach function to attach the bride and groom, the oval, and the edge of the template piece together so I can overlay this on the two previous layers. I think this one needs a little bit of adjusting to make sure everything lines up right, so I move it to the side, I click detach, and I move the pieces. Then I put it back over the layers again and see where I need to make further adjustments. One nice function here is to highlight all of the elements in this section and use the Arrange function to center all of your elements together. This can help make sure everything is in line the same way it would look once it's cut out, so you don't have to guess and try to manually line everything up. Once everything is lined up the way I like, I pull off the first two layers so I can work on the very back layer where I still have the overhanging trees. First, I highlight the elements and start welding them together so that I can later do a slice. Then once I have this whole sheet attached together, I'll insert a large rectangle and make it match the size of this overall template, and then I'll use the slice function. To use slice, I highlight this rectangle, press the command button, and click the piece behind it, and then click slice. As you can see here, it creates the different images along the edges of where the two pieces were. I delete the pieces that I don't need, and what I'm left with is exactly the shape that I want to cut out on my Cricut. I see there was a gap here, so I insert another square, and I'm going to cover just that little gap that would cut out on the Cricut. Then I'm going to weld this together so that there's no gap that shows through. I had the gray rectangle highlighted first, so when I clicked weld, it turned the entire piece gray. So I'm just going to go up to the color up at the top and change it back to white so it's cohesive with the rest of the layers. Then I weld together the layer with the arch and the layer with the bride and groom kissing. I had brought the bride and groom kissing back over the arch just to check the fit again. So this time when I'm welding it, to make sure that I have the right pieces and don't weld it to the arch layer, I actually select the pieces from the right-hand scroll bar and then click weld. Finally, it's time to work on the top and forwardmost layer of the light display shadow box. For this, I drag the large pieces of lace over to the template that I'm using. I send the template to the back so I can see the lace on the front. And then I'm just going to play around with moving these pieces of lace into different arrangements until the whole front is covered. There's not a lot of gaps, and it looks like how I want it to look. This top layer is normally one of my favorite ones to create because you have so much artistic freedom. I'm trying to arrange the lace so that there's no obvious pattern or duplication. And I'm also trying to make sure that I leave enough gap so that light can shine through the empty holes. And I'm trying to get these close enough to the edge that you can still see the 3 layers behind it. Once the lace layer looks nice, I highlight all the elements and attach them. I'm not welding yet so that I can still have flexibility to move these. Then I bring all of the 4 layers together, overlay them on top of each other to check that the lace looks nice. After looking at it, I want to make a few adjustments, so I pull that layer back off and detach the elements so I can work with them individually. Then I'm just trying to fill in some spots that I thought looked empty or move some areas that I thought looked like were too patterned or too structured. As I continue working on it, I'll bring this whole piece back over the other 3 layers that are already completed just to continue checking that it looks good with the background. Once the lace is all set up in a way that I like, I weld all the pieces together and then bring this back over the other 3 layers and center it. The final elements to work on are the individual cutouts for the bride and groom, so I split the layers back apart so that I can work on the 3rd layer, which is the bride and groom kissing. I like to work on this layer with the sizing by having the bride and groom be in a different color because it's easier to see the line and to see if the bride and groom are the right size, if they're undersized, or if they're still oversized. As I'm working on this, I'm trying to undersize the bride and groom slightly from the background behind it, because once these are glued on and the light shining from behind it, it will create a really cool halo effect. I'm intentionally not welding the bride and groom together or welding them to the layer behind it because these need to be free-form cutouts unattached to anything else. Then I save the project and bring all the layers back together again so that I can size and format the outermost paper box that we'll create. As mentioned before, I'll post a link down below on a tutorial video for how to create your own paper box and how to create the 4 template pieces of paper. Each of these layers and the paper box needs to be sized to fit within your shadow box. It needs to be a snug fit, but not so tight that all your papers bend. Also not so tight that it's really difficult to get the box in. So to do this, measure the inner wall of your shadow box and then use the dimension references in the Cricut Design Space to create your paper packet to be the same width as that inner wall. Adjust the size of your paper packet first before overlaying the top and bottom pieces of the paper box, because the paper box will have different dimensions in Cricut Design Space due to the edges that will fold. Your paper packet should fit tightly within the edges of the score lines of the back piece of the paper box. You also want the top piece of the paper box to be slightly larger than the back piece of the paper box so that after it's cut out and folded, it will fit together. It's good practice to cut either the back or the top piece of the paper box first to ensure that it fits within your shadow box after the edges have been folded. Additionally, it helps you to size any of your layers before cutting out any of your detail pieces. To cut only one layer, you can hide the elements you don't want to cut on the right-hand scroll bar by clicking the I button. Then click Make It at the top right of the screen. I use 65-pound cardstock, so I have my Cricut machine set to cardstock and I have the base material loaded as 80-pound cardstock in the Cricut Design Space. I find that this cuts the best. Walk through the load and start buttons on the Cricut machine to start the cut. Then you can go back into the Cricut Design Space after checking the fit of the paper box, make any adjustments if needed, and continue cutting out the rest of your layers. Remove the back piece of the paper box that you just cut from your sticky mat. To do this without bending the paper, I like to bend the sticky mat. Then fold the back piece of the paper box along the scored lines. Make sure to fold and pop the tabs out as well. Once you have this entire paper folded, use hot glue or some other form of glue to glue the tabs down to the box. Always try to glue the tabs to the inside of the box rather than to the outside edge. Glue down all 4 corners of the paper box, and then try to fit the paper box into your shadow box. As you can see here, the paper box fits snugly into my shadow box, but it's not too tight. Since I have a good fit, I then cut the top piece to the paper box, fold and glue it in the same way, and then fit it to the bottom piece of the paper box. Finally, I'll fit the paper box packet into my shadow box display just to make sure that everything fits. Once I have that checked, I'll continue cutting the rest of the layers. After each of the layers have been cut, I like to use my X-Acto knife to remove any leftover pieces of paper that didn't stay on the sticky mat. I find it best to push the pieces of paper through the back of the layer so that any pleating around the edges won't show on the front of your design. Here I have the layer that shows the bride and groom kissing, and now I'm going to glue down the extra piece of the bride and the groom on top. This really makes the focal point stand out more, and I like the halo effect that it gives around the edges of the bride and the groom. As I'm gluing these down, I'm being very careful not to get any hot glue near the edges of either the bride or the groom because I don't want that to show through as a part of the shadow when the light's turned on. Once this is glued down, I hold it up to a light source just to check that I have everything aligned right and there's no hot glue showing through. While the paper is cutting, I also like to prepare some foam strips. This is just some foam board that I got from Hobby Lobby, and it's really useful to separate the different layers of paper. This is what's going to create the depth in the shadow box and what will allow the actual shadow to shine between layers. I'm cutting the foam strips about 1/4 inch in width, and I cut these all the way through on a cutting mat with an X-Acto knife. I like to use 4 pieces per piece of paper, so however many layers you're using, just make sure you have enough of the foam strips. The foam board that I'm using has a sticky backing. This will be really useful when we are gluing down the different layers, and I'll show you what I mean by that later on. Once all the layers are cut out and you have enough foam strips cut for each of the pieces of paper, then it's time to assemble the paper packet. To do this, I remove the sticky backing from the piece of foam and then apply a thin line of hot glue to the back. I place this near the edge of the piece of paper. I try to get it close to the edge as possible without it hanging over the edge. I repeat this with 2 more foam strips on the same piece of paper. I apply these foam strips to the front of the very back piece of paper. I build the entire paper packet working from the back layer to the front layer. For the final foam strip that I apply to this layer, I leave the sticky backing on and I glue the other side of the foam strip down. Then I will remove the backing and have the sticky side be face up. This foam isn't sticky enough to hold all of the layers together. However, it is sticky enough that I can put the layer on top of it down, and it allows me the flexibility to align the layer above it to make sure that all of the corners and edges match up without having to align it really quickly as if I had put hot glue on the top of this foam strip. Once it's aligned, I press down on this piece of foam to make sure that there is that stickiness adhering the paper to it, and then I hot glue along the other 3 foam strips. Finally, I come back to this strip of foam and hot glue along it as well. This fully secures the 2 layers of paper together. I repeat the same process with the next 2 layers for the paper packet. I always make sure to leave at least one of the foam strips with the sticky side face up so that it helps me align the next layer that I apply to the top. Now that the paper packet is fully assembled, I check for any hot glue strands and then hold this over a light to check again that everything looks good with the shadow. Then I place my paper packet into the paper box that we previously built. The paper packet should fit snugly within the box, but not too tight. If you have to force it in, it could cause your paper on the front to bend. After you place the paper packet and paper box into your shadow box, you won't really be able to take it out again, so I always clean the inside of the glass before putting this in. I'm using alcohol and a lint-free rag to clean off any smudges, and then I'll use tape to pick up any debris or dust that might have fallen into the glass. This is a really important step to making sure that you have a clean and crisp final look. At this point, I'm also going to take my X-Acto knife and cut out a hole in the very bottom right corner of the back of the shadow box frame. The lights that I use are connected by a wire, so this hole is going to allow the wire to come out the back of the frame. After this is done, I put my paper packet within the paper box into my shadow box frame. Now I'm taking a strip of LED lights and attaching that inside the shadow box. I got these from Lowe's, and I will link them in the description below. This strip light is really nice because it also has a sticky backing. I take the lights completely off of the packaging and then peel the sticky backing off. I put the first layer up against the very edge of the shadow box. Keep in mind how the lights are going to connect to the power source. So this is the edge that connects to the power cord. So I'm making sure to keep that at the bottom center of the box to allow room for the plug-in. Then I press these all the way around the edge of the shadow box. I've connected the power source cord here just to double check that I have enough room for it. I like to do a second layer of the lights just to make the overall box look brighter. But I found that it never works if I make the lights cross across the back of the paper, because the individual lights will actually show through well enough and it distorts how the view looks on the front. So I take the lights and I actually twist them around. It's a natural twist for the lights because of how they were spooled up in the packaging. I just twist the edge and then tape it down to the back of the shadow box, and I make one complete layer with the lights facing inwards. And I try to keep the lights as close to the edge as possible because this is where we have multiple layers of paper and you won't be able to see the individual lights through all that paper. However, it will make the overall box look brighter. Once I have all the lights in and taped down, I cut the LED strip and get rid of the extra. You want to be careful where you're cutting the LED strip. As I show here, this is where you're supposed to cut. You don't want to cut through any of the connections, or it could short the entire circuit and your LEDs might not work. Finally, I'm going to reconnect the power cord and tape this in place as well. Once that's secure, I'll take the back of the shadow box and push that into place. You should still have enough space within your shadow box to be able to secure the back to the shadow box. Now that your shadow box is fully assembled, it's time to plug it in and see how it looks. One reason I really like these LED lights is because they don't heat up, so they're safe to have around the paper. And the second reason is because they light up in so many different colors. I think the yellow color is my favorite for this shadow box. Thanks for watching this video on how to make a light display shadow box using real photos. Let me know how it worked out for you in the comments below, and as always, like and subscribe to see more content.